My name is Ewan Reed. I'm 32 years old, a Special Forces soldier trained to face the enemy. But I was never trained to face my own brother. Growing up, Liam was my hero. So when he and his wife Chloe asked me to use my military privileges to co-sign on a home loan, I never imagined that my refusal would leave me with blood streaming down my face, listening to my sister-in-law say, "Cooley, you should have just signed the mortgage papers." My refusal lit the fuse on the most devastating betrayal. That night in my own home, my brother attacked me from behind with one of our old sports trophies. Before I share the rest of my story, please let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by your own family. The performance began at a high-end steakhouse in uptown Charlotte, the kind of place with dark wood paneling, deep leather booths, and a wine list thick enough to stop a bullet. It was also the kind of place I knew with absolute certainty that Liam and Chloe couldn't afford. But that was the point. The evening wasn't about family. It was about stagecraft. Chloe poured into a tight designer dress that still had the fresh off-the-rack crispness, was in her element. Her phone was a permanent extension of her hand, capturing perfectly angled shots of our Reed family reunion for her Instagram feed. Every few minutes, a flash would go off, accompanied by a caption she'd narrate out loud. "Family first," she'd say with a saccharine smile, while Liam played his part, endlessly bringing up stories from our childhood. "Remember that time I saved you from the neighbor's dog, Yui?" he asked, his voice booming a little too loudly. "Always looking out for my little sister." I just nodded, a small smile fixed on my face. It felt like watching a poorly rehearsed play where every line was delivered with a heavy-handed wink to an invisible audience. Every sweet word, every fond memory felt like a calculated move in a game I didn't yet understand. I knew an objective was coming. In my line of work, you learn to read a room to spot the inconsistencies between words and actions. Here, the entire atmosphere was one big inconsistency. The waitress came by, a young woman with a polite, practiced smile. "Can I get?" "You started with something to drink." "I'll have a bottle of the Cabernet Sauvignon," Chloe announced, pointing to a name on the wine list I knew cost over $100. She then looked at me, her smile tightening just a fraction. "I'll just have a Sierra Nevada." "Thanks," I said to the waitress. "A simple pale ale, a taste of North Carolina." Chloe's eyes flickered with something, not quite anger, but a cool disdain. She leaned toward Liam, whispering just loud enough for me to hear over the restaurant's low hum. "Still keeping it simple, I see." The comment hung in the air, a tiny, perfect little barb. It wasn't just about the beer. It was about my job, my modest home in Fayetteville, my life that wasn't curated for social media. It was a reminder that in her world, I didn't quite measure up. The rest of the dinner followed the same script. We talked, but we didn't connect. I listened to Chloe complain about the rising cost of organic groceries one minute, then watched her flaunt a new designer handbag the next. A bag she proudly declared she was paying for in installments. The hypocrisy was so blatant, it was almost impressive. Then, after the creme brulee arrived, Chloe set down her spoon and folded her hands on the table. The smile she gave me was her most dazzling yet. The main act was about to begin. "You and honey," she started, her voice dropping into a tone of practiced sincerity. "Liam and I have been thinking so much about the future, about family." She glanced at Liam. "About a home where your future nieces and nephews can run around in the backyard." Liam, who had been nervously shredding his napkin, picked up his cue after a sharp nudge from his wife under the table. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, Yui, we found the perfect house. It's got everything, but things are a little tight right now." I waited, my posture unchanged. I felt my training kick in. Observe. Assess. Don't react. Chloe didn't let the silence linger. She leaned forward, her eyes wide and earnest. "It's just a piece of paper. Ewan, a formality. We need you to co-sign on the loan. Your VA loan." She said the last two words as if they were a magic spell. "That's your privilege." You're supposed to use it to help. Family. Then came the final brutal twist of the knife. You owe us that. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. You owe us my service, my sacrifices, the years I dedicated to my country. She had just reduced all of it to a transactional chit. A favor I was now obligated to cash in for their dream house. It was a profound, staggering insult, but my face betrayed nothing. Emotion is a liability. I shifted from sister to soldier. This was no longer a family dinner. It was a threat assessment. What's your credit history like, Liam? I asked, my tone even. He flinched. Well, it's complicated. What's the contingency plan for repayment if your sales commissions drop? I pressed, my eyes fixed on him. Not Chloe. Chloe scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. The mask of sincerity was gone, replaced by unconcealed irritation. Oh, for God's sake, Ewan. Don't turn this into an interrogation at Fort Bragg. This is your brother, not the enemy. It was a classic tactic. Deflect with emotion. Reframe logic as hostility. She was trying to corner me, to make my due diligence seem like a personal attack, a lack of faith. I remained silent, but inside red lights were flashing on my personal dashboard. The mission parameters had become clear. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding a blank check backed by my career and my honor. Liam launched into a string of desperate, rambling promises about how he'd never miss a payment. How this was his one big chance. But all I saw was the weakness in his eyes. The same weakness that had gotten him into trouble his whole life. And in Chloe's eyes, I saw something far more dangerous. Cold, hard calculation. The ride to the parking valet was a silent, suffocating affair. As we stood, waiting for our cars, the cool Charlotte night air did little to clear the tension. Chloe gave me a hug that felt like a block of ice. As she pulled away, she delivered her final payload. Her voice a low warning shot. Mom and Dad are going to be so disappointed if they find out you wouldn't help your own brother when he was struggling. And there it was, the ultimate weapon, their love. My parents' approval weaponized against me. They weren't asking anymore. They were threatening. As I watched their car pull away, I knew with chilling certainty that this wasn't a request for a favor. This was a declaration of war. The 2-hour drive from Charlotte back to my quiet street in Fayetteville was a blur of highway. Hypnosis and Chloe's parting words echoing in my head. Mom and Dad are going to be so disappointed. It was their favorite weapon, the one they unsheathed whenever my compliance wavered. By the time I turned the key in my own front door, the anger from the restaurant had cooled into something much heavier, a familiar ache that settled deep in my bones. My house was silent, orderly. Everything had its place. It was my fortress, the one space on earth I'd built for myself, governed by my own rules of logic and discipline. But tonight, the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt vast and empty. And the ghosts of my past were waiting for me in the stillness. I went to the closet in the spare bedroom and pulled down an old wooden box from the top shelf. It wasn't treasure. Not really. It was Pandora's box filled with the artifacts of a childhood spent in the shadows. I lifted the lid, the faint scent of aged paper and cedar rising to meet me. Inside lay the evidence, a carefully preserved archive of my own insignificance. The first thing my fingers found was a faded photograph. It was from Liam's junior year of high school, the night he won the regional football championship. He's there in the center, grinning, holding a golden trophy, his face luminous under the stadium lights. My parents are on either side of him, beaming with a pride so fierce it practically radiates off the glossy paper. And then there's me off to the very edge of the frame. I'm 14. All awkward limbs and braces half obscured by someone's shoulder. My face slightly out of focus. I wasn't a participant in the memory. I was just a blurry bystander in the story of my family. I sifted through more pictures, each one telling the same tale. Liam's 16th birthday. A mountain of brightly wrapped presents piled on the dining room table. A new bike. a video game console, designer sneakers, then a photo from my 16th birthday a year later. Me sitting in front of a single homemade chocolate cake with a book my mom had picked up from a bookstore sale. I was never the star. I was just the supporting cast and extra in the blockbuster production of my brother's life. These memories weren't a happy home movie. They were a map charting a geography of countless tiny wounds, a landscape of scars left by a lifetime of being overlooked. My mind drifted to the summer I turned 15. I'd gotten a job scooping ice cream at a local parlor downtown. For 2 months, I worked 5 shifts a week, my arms aching, my clothes perpetually sticky, with the smell of sugar and waffle cones. I saved every single dollar, tucking the cash into an envelope hidden under my mattress. It was for a summer science camp at Duke University. A week of biology labs and stargazing that I wanted more than anything. I had almost enough. Then one night, Liam got into trouble again. Something involving a friend's car and a mailbox. He needed bail money. I remember my parents' faces etched with worry when they came into my room. My dad couldn't meet my eyes. It was my mom who spoke. "Families help each other, Yuan," she said, her voice soft but firm as she took the envelope from my hiding spot. "You can go to camp next year." But next year never came. The money was never paid back. An apology was never offered. My sacrifice, my hard-earned summer was simply absorbed into the ongoing crisis that was my brother. It was a brutal lesson. My dreams were expendable. My efforts were a resource to be tapped for the sake of the golden child. It was a quiet, suffocating injustice that I swallowed down just like I always did. If you know what it feels like to have your hard work taken for granted, please press the like button to show your support. And in the comments below, I'd love to hear about the first real job you ever had. It's funny how hard we'd work just for that first taste of independence. It's true that Liam used to protect me when we were kids. He was bigger, louder, and he'd chase off the bullies who made fun of my secondhand clothes. He was my hero then, but that protection always came at a price. I had to stay in his shadow. My role was to be the quiet, grateful little sister. Any achievement of mine was immediately held up against his. When I got straight A's, the response was, "That's nice, honey, but Liam is so good with people." The ultimate betrayal of my role came when I enlisted. I thought they'd be proud. Instead, my mother cried. "Why can't you just get a normal job like your brother?" she'd sobbed. "This is so dangerous. It's not for you." They didn't see strength in my choice. They saw it as a deviation from the script. My success, my independence, felt like a personal affront to them, a rejection of the damsel in distress character. They had cast me as the one who would always need her big brother to save her. Sitting there on the floor of my quiet house, the past and present collided. Chloe's manipulative words, Liam's demand, it wasn't a single event. It was an echo, a reverberation of every time I was told my needs came second, every time I had to shrink myself to make room for him. It was the same pattern, just with higher stakes. This time, however, something was different. As I sat in the stillness, a voice floated into my memory. It wasn't my mother's or my father's. It was the voice of a psychologist, Jordan Peterson, from a podcast I'd listened to on a long drive back from a training exercise. His words were clear and uncompromising. Take responsibility for your own life. You can't change other people, but you can change yourself. The phrase settled over me not as a judgment, but as a key unlocking a door I never knew was there. Responsibility. All my life my responsibility had been defined for me. Be a good daughter. Be a good sister. Don't make waves. But what was my responsibility to myself? I realized in that moment that taking responsibility for my life also meant defending it even from the people I was supposed to love most. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of a picture frame. The woman staring back was in a blurry figure on the edge of the photo. She was a soldier. She had built this life, this fortress on her own. And a question sharp and terrifying cut through the years of silence. Without him as the sun, Did his shadow even exist at all? The next morning, the darkness outside my window was still absolute when my alarm went off at 500. There was no debate, no hitting snooze. My feet hit the cold floor and the day began, same as it always did. By 05:15, I was dressed and my German Shepherd, Ranger, was waiting by the door, his tail thumping a steady rhythm against the wall. We ran our usual 5 miles through the pre-dawn quiet of Fayetteville, our breath pluming in the cool North Carolina air. Back home, everything was in its place. My running shoes went back on their rack. The coffee was brewing on a timer, and the house was a silent testament to order and discipline. This place wasn't just a house. It was my fortress, painstakingly constructed to keep out the chaos of the world and the chaos of my own past. As I stood under the hot spray of the shower, the question from the night before returned, sharp and insistent. Without him as the sun, did his shadow even exist at all? The answer, I realized, had been forged years ago, not in a quiet home, but in the unforgiving crucible of the North Carolina wilderness. I hadn't joined the army out of some blind sense of patriotism. I joined to find a place where worth measured in action, not in bloodlines or birth order. I joined to prove, if only to myself, that Liam Reed's little sister could cast her own damn shadow. My mind went back to the hell on earth that is Special Forces Assessment and Selection, SFAS. It's a 24-day-long interview process designed to break you. I remember the feeling of my lungs burning like they were filled with acid as I humped a ruck weighing nearly 100 pounds up another godforsaken hill at Camp McCall. They called one of the training courses Star Course, a multi-day land navigation event that was less about stars and more about pushing your body and mind to the absolute brink. I remember sleepless nights spent in the woods, my fingers numb, trying to solve complex navigation problems while my body screamed for rest. Every grueling step, every moment of doubt was a choice. While Liam had always had our parents clearing the path for him, I had deliberately chosen the hardest path I could find. And somewhere out there, in the mud and the exhaustion and the relentless pressure, I found myself, not Liam's little sister, not the family disappointment. I was Candidate Reed, and in that world, that was the only identity that mattered. The name on my uniform was a shield, and the sweat soaking through my fatigues was washing away the blurry girl at the edge of the photograph. There was one moment seared into my memory that changed everything. We were on a long-range movement deep into the training. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and my ankle had rolled badly on a loose rock. A sharp white-hot pain shot up my leg. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to have to quit. I sat down hard, the weight of the ruck pinning me to the ground, my head spinning with failure. Then one of the other candidates, a guy I'd barely spoken 2 words to the entire time, stopped. He walked back to me. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply knelt, unclipped some of the pouches from my ruck, and attached them to his own, adding my weight to his already crushing load. He just looked at me, gave a single sharp nod, and started walking again. We made it to the finish point together. That was the moment I finally understood the meaning of family. It wasn't about blood. It wasn't about shared history. It was about the person who turns back for you when you fall. The person who takes on your burden without a word simply because it's the right thing to do. It was an unspoken oath more binding than any law. It was the heart of the Special Forces Creed. I would later have to memorize the line that says, "I will never leave a fallen comrade." My focus snapped back to the present as my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The steam from my coffee cup swirled around it. I picked it up. A text from Liam. "Have you thought about it? Don't be so selfish. Ewan." Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. Me, the woman who had sacrificed her youth, who had pushed her body past its limits, who had willingly placed her life in harm's way in dusty, forgotten corners of the world. I was being called selfish by my brother, a man whose greatest sacrifice was deciding which tie to wear to his car dealership job. A cold, clear anger washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of familial guilt. The debate was over. The battle lines were drawn. I wasn't just a sister anymore. I was a soldier, and I had a duty to defend my own life, my own honor. The creed applied to me too. I would not leave this fallen comrade behind. I deleted his message without a reply. Then I opened a new text. My thumbs moved with purpose. It was to Alex, my boyfriend. Hey, are you free for dinner tonight? I'm making that chicken pot pie you like. I hit send. In the quiet of my fortress, I had made my choice. I was turning toward the family I had built, not the one I was born into. Alex arrived just after 7. A bottle of Napa Cabernet in one hand and a smile that instantly eased a knot in my shoulders I hadn't realized I was holding. The moment I opened the door, the warm, savory scent of my chicken pot pie, rich with thyme and rosemary, enveloped us both. It was the smell of comfort, the complete opposite of the sterile, moneyed air of the steakhouse. Smells incredible in here, he said, stepping inside and placing the wine on the counter. There was no tension in the air, no hidden agenda beneath the surface of our conversation. We talked easily as I pulled the bubbling dish from the oven. He told me about a ridiculous case he was working, a string of garden gnome thefts that was baffling his precinct. I told him about a new private at the base who couldn't seem to tell his left from his right. It was normal. It was simple. But Alex, with his detective's intuition, saw past the carefully constructed calm I was projecting. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered on my face a second too long, in the way he kept the conversation light, never pushing. He was creating a safe space, a perimeter of peace, and waiting for me to step into it when I was ready. He poured us both a glass of the deep red wine, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in the storm that had been raging inside me all day. Over dinner, the story of the night before finally came out. I told it in the clipped, professional tone of a soldier giving an after-action report. I laid out the facts, the location, the participants, the objective, my signature, and the psychological tactics employed. I tried to keep my voice even, but a slight tremor betrayed me, my shoulders slumping just enough to give away the weight of it all. Alex listened without interrupting. He didn't offer solutions or strategies. He didn't tell me what I should have said or done. When I finished, the silence was heavy for a moment. Then he simply reached across the small table and took my hand. His was warm and strong around mine. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Ewan, he said. His voice soft but clear. That was it. No judgment, no platitudes, just pure simple validation. It was more powerful than 1,000 words of advice. Later, as he stood beside me at the sink, helping me with the dishes, he spoke again. He dried a plate with methodical care, his movements calm and deliberate. You know, he said, his eyes on his work. In my line of business, I see more family tragedy than anything else. Betrayals over wills, fights over money, parents manipulating their kids. It's the oldest story in the book. You're not crazy for feeling the way you do. And you're not alone in this. Hearing that, the confirmation that my reaction was normal, that I wasn't being overly sensitive or cold-hearted, felt like a pressure valve being released. It was the one thing my own family had never given me, the assurance that my feelings were valid. Just as we were finishing up, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find my commanding officer, Master Sergeant Miller, standing on my porch. We called him Sarge. He was a mountain of a man, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and a no-nonsense demeanor that terrified new recruits. In his large callous hands, he was holding a foil co-ed pan. Heard you were back in town, Reed, he said in his typical gruff military bark. Welcome home. His eyes flicked to Alex, giving him a curt nod of acknowledgement. Mrs. Miller made too many brownies. Figured I'd drop some off on my way home. I knew it was an excuse. Mrs. Miller never made too many of anything. This was how soldiers took care of each other. It wasn't with long emotional talks. It was with action. It was showing up. It was a pan of brownies on a Tuesday night. I took the pan, the warmth seeping through the foil into my hands. Thank you, Sarge. That's really nice of you. Don't mention it, he grunted, already turning to leave. See you at 0600 for PT. And with that, he was gone. Later that night, long after Alex had kissed me goodnight and Serge Miller was surely fast asleep, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence was a peaceful blanket. I took a bite of one of the brownies. It was rich and fudgy, still slightly warm in the middle. And in that moment, the full staggering truth of it all hit me. This was my family, my real family. It was the perceptive boyfriend who knew when to talk and when to just be present, washing dishes by my side. It was the tough-as-nails commander who showed his concern with a pan of homemade baked goods. It was the brother in arms who had wordlessly taken the weight from my pack in the middle of a forest years ago. A line from the Bible my great-aunt used to read to me floated into my mind. A proverb she'd had cross-stitched on a pillow. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. My brother wasn't Liam. My brothers were the men and women who stood by me when it counted. They were the anchors holding me steady in the hurricane. The stark, painful contrast between the unconditional warmth I felt in this house and the cold, transactional chill of my own blood relatives made my heart ache. But underneath the pain, there was a new unshakable strength. I knew with absolute certainty which family I was going to fight for. The peace was short-lived. A fortress can withstand a siege, but it can't stop the signals that travel through the air. The attack, when it came, wasn't a frontal assault. It was an insurgency. A campaign of psychological warfare waged through the one device I couldn't just shut off. My phone. A few days after my quiet evening with Alex and Sarge, Liam and Chloe's operation began. It started with a text from my brother. Chloe's been crying for 2 days straight because of you. I hope you're happy. You're tearing our family apart. I read the words and felt a familiar, weary resignation. I didn't reply. An hour later, another one. A picture of a house, clearly a screenshot from a real estate website with the caption, "This was going to be our future. Thanks for destroying it." When the text went unanswered, the phone calls started. It was Chloe this time, her voice thick with practiced tears. "Ewan, I just don't understand why you hate us so much." She'd sob into the phone. "We're family. Family is supposed to be there for each other." Each call, each message was a precision-guided munition aimed directly at the guilt complex they had spent a lifetime building inside me. It was a strategy one recognized. In the military, we have SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. They teach you to recognize and resist psychological manipulation techniques, isolation, exploiting your loyalties, inducing fear and guilt. My family, it turned out, were natural-born interrogators. With the cool detachment of a soldier analyzing a threat, I did the only logical thing. I blocked both their numbers. Silence. For a day, my fortress was secure again. But I had underestimated my opponent. They knew my defenses. When they couldn't get through my perimeter, they called in air support. They deployed their ultimate weapon, my parents. My mother called first. Her voice was a nervous flutter. "You and honey, what are you doing?" Liam called. "He's so upset. He said you look down on him because he's not as successful as you. How could you be so cruel to your own brother?" I tried to explain the financial realities, the irresponsibility of it all. But my words were just noise to her. She wasn't listening to my logic. She was reacting to Liam's narrative. The golden child was hurting. And the shadow was to blame. Then my father called. This was the one that truly hurt. I'd always respected my dad. He was the one who taught me the value of $1, the importance of a good credit score, the pride in standing on your own 2 feet. His voice on the line wasn't angry. It was worse. It was heavy with disappointment. "I taught you kids to look out for each other," he said, his tone quiet and wounded. Your brother needs you right now. Oh, Yuan. All he's ever done is try to protect you. Don't let money get in the way of what's really important. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. The very principles he had instilled in me, prudence, responsibility, self-reliance, were now being dismissed as character flaws. Sometimes family is more important than rules, Yuan, he finished. Don't be so rigid. His disappointment was more painful than any accusation because it struck at the deepest, most childish part of me. The part that still, after all these years, just wanted his approval. The final escalation came on a Saturday evening. I was just getting back from the gym, feeling the satisfying ache of a hard workout when I saw it. A silver Lexus SUV, Chloe's, of course, parked in my driveway and my space. They had driven the 2.5 hours from Charlotte to Fagotville unannounced. My fortress had been breached. Liam and Chloe got out of the car as I approached. They didn't look like they were here for a conversation. They looked like they were here to collect a debt. Their faces were set in grim, determined lines. We need to talk, Yuan. Right now, Liam said it wasn't a request. It was an order. They followed me to my front door. Their presence a violation of the one place on earth I felt truly safe. They didn't respect my space, my time, or the boundaries I had tried to set. The conversation inside was short and brutal. It wasn't a discussion. It was a confrontation. I stood in my own living room, my gym bag still slung over my shoulder, and calmly repeated my position. I'm not going to co-sign, I said, my voice level. It's too big of a financial risk for both of you, and it's not a risk I'm willing to underwrite. Chloe let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound full of contempt. Risk? She sneered, looking around my modest, tidy home as if it were a Vel. Or are you just scared we'll have a better life than you? Scared your big brother might finally have something to be proud of, something that isn't all about you and your military career? Her words, so full of venom, stripped away the last of their pretenses. This wasn't about family. It was about envy. Her cruelty was the spark Liam needed. His face, which had been pale and tense, flushed a dark red. He took a step toward me, his finger jabbing the air, just inches from my face. You've changed, Yuan, he spat, his voice trembling with rage. The armies turned you into some kind of heartless robot. You don't care about anyone but yourself anymore. I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, at the stranger wearing my brother's face. The silence that followed was electric. Finally, seeing he couldn't break me, his face twisted into an ugly sneer. You're going to regret this, he whispered, the words a low, chilling promise. They turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of my home. I stood there for a long time, the quiet ringing in my ears. The air was thick with the residue of their hatred. And I knew with the cold certainty of a soldier who has just heard the click, Liam's threat hung in the air long after he was gone. A toxic cloud that settled over my fortress and refused to dissipate. I knew my brother. I knew his temper, his weakness, his desperate need to win at any cost. But even I wasn't prepared for the cowardice of his next move. The final straw, the one that broke the back of any lingering loyalty I had, wasn't a direct confrontation. It was a knife in the back delivered through the gentle, concerned voice of my aunt. She called a few days later. You and honey, it's Aunt Carol, she began, her voice laced with a careful, hesitant sympathy. I was just talking to Chloe and she mentioned you've been having a hard time since your last deployment. She said you've been a little paranoid. Honey, are you okay? Is there anything you need? I went completely still, the phone cold against my ear. The world narrowed to a single point of icy rage. They hadn't just attacked my finances. They hadn't just attacked my character. They had attacked my honor. They were weaponizing PTSD, the invisible wound that haunted so many of my brothers and sisters in arms, to discredit me, to paint me as unstable. It was the most despicable, calculated act of cruelty I could imagine. They were trying to destroy my career, my sanity, my very identity as a soldier. That was it. The time for restraint was over. Anger became action. My training took over. In a combat situation, you don't operate on assumptions. You operate on intelligence. I would no longer trust a single word that came from my family. I went to my laptop. My movements precise and economical. I paid a small fee to an online background check service, one of those sites that can pull public records with a few clicks. I entered Liam's name and date of birth and waited as the progress bar crawled across the screen. The truth that loaded onto my monitor was far uglier than I had imagined. It wasn't just bad credit. It was a dumpster fire. Maxed out credit cards, court judgments for unpaid debts, and worst of all, a series of high-interest payday loans. He wasn't just broke. He was drowning. He was being hunted. The dream house wasn't an investment for the future. It was a desperate, insane scheme to use the equity from a VA loan to pay off loan sharks before they broke his legs. This wasn't about building a life. It was about saving his skin. That evening, as I was trying to process the sheer scale of his deception, my phone rang. It was Liam. His voice was frantic, choked with panic. "Ewan, you have to help me. Chloe left. She packed a bag and she's gone. I don't know what to do. I need to talk to you. Please." My heart, against all logic, clenched. For a split second, the hardened soldier vanished, and I was just a little sister. Again, hearing the terror in her big brother's voice. As much as I hated him in that moment, the instinct to help was buried deep in my DNA. "Okay," I said, my voice tight. "Come over." It was a fatal mistake. He arrived an hour later, reeking of bourbon. He wasn't distraught. He was belligerent. He stumbled into my house, not looking for comfort, but for a fight. "This is all your fault," he roared, his words slurring together. "You did this. You pushed her away with your high and mighty act. You ruined my life." My training and de-escalation kicked in. I kept my voice calm and low. I kept my distance. "Liam, you're drunk. You need to calm down. Let me get you some water." I tried to guide him toward the sofa, hoping to get him to sit down to contain the situation. And that's when the trap sprung. It was my moment of compassion. My final foolish attempt to be a sister that he exploited. I turned my back on him for just a second to walk to the kitchen and get him a glass of water. In that split second of vulnerability, he acted. His rage wasn't just a drunken impulse. It was calculated. He lunged for the bookshelf, grabbing the heavy metal soccer trophy from my high school championship. A trophy he had helped me win. A symbol of the only time in our lives we had truly been a team. I heard the rush of air behind me and started to turn, but it was too late. He swung it with all his strength, a vicious two-handed blow. The metal connected with the side of my head with a sickening crunch. The world exploded in a flash of white pain, then went dark. As I collapsed to the floor, through the ringing in my ears, I heard the front door open. I blinked, trying to clear the black spots from my vision. Chloe walked in. Her face was a mask of cold composure. There was no surprise, no concern. Her purse was still on her shoulder. She had been waiting in the car. It had all been a setup. She looked down at me, lying in a heap on my own floor. Then her eyes flicked to Liam, who was standing over me, panting, the trophy still in his hand. Her expression was one of pure reptilian indifference. She nudged my leg with the toe of her expensive shoe, as if checking to see if I was a piece of trash she needed to step over. "You should have just signed the loan papers," she said, her voice as flat and dead as a dial tone. This was the moment the war truly began. If you believe that no one should ever have to endure a betrayal like this, please hit the like button to show your support. And in the comments below, just type the word justice if you're ready to see how a soldier fights back. Lying on the hardwood floor with the coppery taste of blood in my mouth and a firework display of pain exploding behind my eyes, I didn't panic. My training cut through the chaos. Panic is a luxury you can't afford when you're compromised. My body was a system, and I was its operator running a rapid damage assessment. The impact point on my head was bleeding freely, suggesting a scalp laceration. The dizziness and ringing in my ears pointed to a concussion. A searing pain in my left shoulder told me it was likely dislocated. I was injured, but operational. My first instinct wasn't to scream for help. It was to preserve the integrity of the scene. With my good arm, I pushed myself backwards, dragging my body away from the immediate area of the attack. I didn't want my movements to smudge a footprint or disturb the position of the fallen lamp. Every detail was now evidence. Only then did I reach for my phone. I didn't dial 911. In a situation like this, a civilian dispatcher would ask too many questions. Questions I didn't have the time to answer. I dialed the one person I trusted to manage the scene with tactical precision. Alex, he answered on the first ring. My report was as clean and concise as a battlefield communication. Alex, I'm at my house. I've been assaulted. Weapon was a metal trophy. Assailant was Liam. There was a half-second of stunned silence. Then the detective in him took over. Okay, Ewan. Are they still there? Negative. They vacated the premises. Are you secure? Affirmative. But I'm injured. Head wound, possible dislocation. I'm 5 minutes out, he said, his voice now dangerously calm. I'm dispatching a unit and an ambulance. Do not touch anything. Do you understand? Understood, I said, and the line went dead. I let my head rest against the cool floor, closed my eyes, and began to control my breathing. The victim part of me was screaming, but the soldier was in command. True to his word, Alex's unmarked car screeched to a halt outside. Before the ambulance sirens were even audible, he and his partner came through the door, weapons holstered, but their hands ready. Alex's face was a mask of professionalism, but his eyes were blazing with a cold fury that I had never seen before. He took one look at me, then at the trophy lying on the floor, and his jaw tightened. While his partner began securing the scene, Alex knelt beside me, his movements gentle. The EMTs are almost here, he said softly. His gaze was taking in every detail. The blood matting my hair, the unnatural angle of my shoulder. He was a detective collecting facts, but he was also the man I loved, cataloging my injuries. At the hospital, after they had popped my shoulder back into its socket and put 7 stitches in my scalp, Alex came into my room. He looked exhausted, but he was holding a small white plastic square in his hand. The memory card. He held it up. It was still recording, he said. It took me a moment to understand. He was talking about the small pet camera he'd given me a few months ago after a neighbor's car was broken into. A little cube I'd set on the bookshelf to keep an eye on Ranger when I was away, and then promptly forgotten about. It was pointed directly at the spot where I had fallen. I pulled the card as soon as the scene was clear, he said, his voice grim. We have it all, Ewan. The whole damn thing. News travels fast in the tight-knit Special Forces community. It's a closed circle built on a foundation of absolute trust. A few hours later, my hospital room door opened. It was Sarge Miller, followed by 2 other members of my team, Rodriguez and Bishop. They didn't bring flowers or balloons. They brought 3 cups of black sludgy coffee from the hospital vending machine and an aura of unshakable solidarity. They moved with a quiet purpose, pulling up chairs, creating a silent, formidable perimeter around my bed. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't need to. In their world, details could wait. The only thing that mattered was that one of their own was down. Sarge handed me a coffee, his expression as unreadable as ever. He just looked at me for a long moment, his eyes assessing my condition with the practiced gaze of a commander who had seen his soldiers through far worse. Finally, he spoke one sentence. You just focus on recovery, Reed, he said, his voice a low rumble. Everything else, we'll handle it. And that's what broke me. Not the betrayal, not the pain. It was the loyalty, the stark Powerful contrast between the brother who had tried to break me and these brothers who had come to build a wall around me. Tears I didn't even know were there began to stream down my face, hot and silent. A few days later, I was back in my fortress, my arm in a sling, a constant dull ache throbbing in my head. But my mind was clear. The mission was defined. The motto of the Special Forces is da oppresso libere, to free the oppressed. This time I was the one who needed liberating, and I was going to have to free myself. Alex and I turned my dining room table into a command center. We weren't just building an assault case anymore. We were building a full-spectrum operation. Our arsenal of evidence was formidable. Exhibit A. The video from the pet cam showing the unprovoked attack and Chloe's cold-blooded arrival. Exhibit B. The background check I had run detailing Liam's gambling debts and predatory loans. Exhibit C. A full log of the threatening and manipulative text messages from both Liam and Chloe. Exhibit D. Alex, using his law enforcement resources, had identified the loan sharks Liam was entangled with. They painted a picture of a man so desperate he would do anything to get cash. We laid it all out piece by piece. The initial request for money, the campaign of psychological pressure, the escalation, the premeditated physical assault. It wasn't a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. It was a conspiracy. It was the Cumberland County courthouse was a cold, imposing building of marble and dark polished wood, designed to feel solemn and significant. It smelled of old paper and floor wax. As I walked through the heavy double doors into the courtroom, the air shifted, becoming thick with a tense, sterile silence. I was dressed for battle, a sharply tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt. My left arm was still in a sling, a visible, undeniable testament to the reason we were all here. I didn't look at Liam and Chloe, who were huddled at the defendant's table with their lawyer, looking pale and shrunken under the fluorescent lights. I didn't look at my parents sitting in the second row of the gallery. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their confused, heartbroken energy, but I couldn't meet their gaze. To do so would be to acknowledge a connection that in this room no longer existed. This wasn't a family reunion. This was a theater of war, and I was here to present the facts. As I walked to the witness stand, a quote from the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg echoed in my mind, something I'd read long ago. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. This was my way, not with rage, but with truth. When it was my turn to testify, I moved with a practiced calm. I was sworn in, my voice steady, as I promised to tell the whole truth and nothing but. The assistant district attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Davies, began her questioning. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I delivered my testimony the same way I would deliver an after-action report, with clarity, precision, and an unwavering focus on the objective facts. I detailed the dinner at the steakhouse, the carefully constructed performance of a happy family. I recounted the subsequent campaign of calls and text messages, the psychological pressure designed to break me down. I described their unannounced arrival at my home, the violation of my sanctuary. Liam's lawyer, a slick man with a cheap suit, kept trying to interrupt. Objection, Your Honor, he'd say. This is a simple family dispute. It has no bearing on the charge. Each time the judge would overrule him. After one such objection, I paused. I didn't look at the lawyer. I didn't look at the judge. I looked directly at the 12 men and women in the jury box, a collection of ordinary citizens, librarians and mechanics and school teachers. In the military, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. We have a term for this pattern of behavior. We call it an escalation of hostility. It's a deliberate, calculated series of actions designed to provoke a reaction and soften a target before an attack. A ripple of understanding went through the jury box. I had just given them a framework. This wasn't a squabble over money. This was a planned operation. But the most venomous attack came from Chloe's lawyer. During his cross-examination, he approached me with a look of feigned sympathy. Captain Reed, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You're a Green Beret. Is that correct? You've served on multiple combat deployments. Yes, I answered. My eyes locked on his. And would you say that those experiences can be stressful, traumatic even? Any soldier's experience can be stressful. Yes. And isn't it true? He continued, leaning in, that it's not uncommon for soldiers returning from such environments to suffer from, let's say, an altered perception of events, to perhaps misinterpret a situation, to even experience paranoia. There it was, the cowardly, desperate strategy we knew was coming. The attempt to use my service, my honor as a weapon, against me. The entire courtroom held its breath. I didn't flinch. No, I said, my voice like ice. My perception is perfectly clear. That's when Ms. Davies stood up. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing with authority. The prosecution would like to present Exhibit A. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly, and a large screen flickered to life. A collective murmur went through the room. And then there it was. The silent, unforgiving eye of the pet camera broadcasting the truth for everyone to see. The video was chillingly clear. The screen showed the argument, Liam's face contorted in rage. It showed me turning away, the brief fatal moment of de-escalation. It showed him lunging for the trophy, the vicious swing and the brutal, sickening impact. A collective gasp echoed in the courtroom as my body crumpled to the floor. But the worst part came next. The video showed the door opening and Chloe entering, her expression utterly devoid of shock or concern. It captured her cold, indifferent approach. And though the audio was faint, the lip readers on the jury didn't need to be experts to understand the cruel final words she spoke as she looked down at my broken form. The performance was over. The truth was out. From the gallery, I heard a choked, agonizing sob. It was my mother. It was the sound of a heartbreaking as the carefully constructed fantasy of her perfect son shattered into a million pieces. Liam slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Chloe stared at the screen, her face the color of ash. Their lies had been incinerated by the raw, undeniable light of reality. The judge called for a recess. It was over. Facing the irrefutable evidence, Liam and Chloe had no choice. They took a plea deal. When the court reconvened, the verdict was a formality. Liam was convicted of felony assault with a deadly weapon. Chloe, for her role in the conspiracy and her presence at the scene, was found guilty as an accessory. They were both going to prison. As the judge read the sentence, I waited for a feeling of triumph, of victory, but it never came. Instead, what washed over me was a profound and heavy sense of release. It felt as if a massive, crushing weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders my entire life, a weight I didn't even fully realize was there, had finally been lifted. The noise in my head, the constant struggle for validation, the fight to be seen, it all just stopped. I stood up. I gave a slight formal nod to Miss Davies. And then I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look at Liam or Chloe. I didn't look at my weeping parents. I just walked, my head held high, my sling a badge of honor. And in the days that followed the verdict, I'd expected to feel a sense of elation, a victor's satisfaction. But there was none. Instead, a profound hollow silence descended upon my life. My fortress, once a shield against the chaos of the world, now felt like a soundproof room, amplifying an emptiness that was somehow louder than all the shouting and threats had ever been. The phone no longer rang with my mother's pleading or Chloe's fake sobs. My inbox was free of Liam's manipulative texts. The war was over, but I was left standing alone on a silent, scorched battlefield. I had won, but the cost of that victory was the complete and utter annihilation of the family I was born into. Alex was my anchor in that quiet storm. He didn't try to fill the silence with cheerful platitudes or force me to talk about it. He just existed alongside me. He'd come over after his shift, and we'd sit on the porch watching the North Carolina twilight settle over the pine trees, not saying a word. He'd make coffee in the morning and just leave a mug on the counter for me. His presence was a quiet, constant pressure reminding me that I wasn't entirely alone. That one small piece of solid ground remained in my life. He didn't try to fix my pain. He simply shared the space it occupied. A week after the sentencing, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. My hand trembled as I picked it up. A small foolish flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe now, after the undeniable truth had been exposed, there would be an apology, an acknowledgement, an olive branch. I slit the envelope open. The letter was short. It was not an apology. How could you do this to your brother? It began. Our family is in ruins. All because of your stubbornness and your need to be right. We hope you're satisfied. They still didn't see it. Or maybe they refused to. They didn't see my pain, my betrayal, my wound. They only saw their own loss, the loss of their perfect son, the destruction of their family's image. And they blamed me for holding up the mirror that showed them the truth. I read the letter once, then twice. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. All I felt was a cold, desolate clarity. The door I had left cracked open for them. The door I didn't even realize I'd been holding had just been slammed shut. From the other side, I didn't cry. I walked out to the small patio behind my house, took a metal mixing bowl from the kitchen, and set the letter inside. I struck a match and dropped it onto the paper. The corners curled, turning black before catching fire. I watched the ink of their accusations, their blame, their blindness, turn to gray ash and float away on the gentle evening breeze. It wasn't an act of anger. It was a funeral. A final goodbye to a fantasy I'd clung to for far too long. There was one last thing I had to do. To Alex's surprise, I told him I was going to visit Liam in prison just once. The visiting room was a sterile, soulless place, smelling of antiseptic and despair. We sat on opposite sides of a thick plexiglass partition, speaking through crackly telephone receivers. He looked diminished, thinner, older, with the haunted, hollowed-out eyes of a man who has lost everything. He wouldn't look at me directly, his gaze fixed on the countertop. He mumbled a weak, pathetic apology, a string of words that still managed to weave in excuses about Chloe's influence, about the pressure he was under, about how things had just gotten out of hand. But I hadn't come for an apology. I hadn't come for closure from him. I had come for closure. For me. I pressed the receiver to my ear and waited for him to finish. When he finally trailed off into silence, I spoke, my voice calm and even. I forgive you, Liam, I said. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. I'm not forgiving you for your sake, I continued, my voice steady. I'm forgiving you for mine. I'm forgiving you so I can let this go. So I don't have to carry your poison around inside me for the rest of my life. But we're done. This is the end. I looked at my brother, the hero of my childhood, the villain of my adulthood, for one last time. Then I stood up, placed the receiver back in its cradle, and walked away without looking back. Driving home, I felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but also a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The final anchor to my past had been cut. I was adrift, but I was free. But as the days turned into a week, a new unsettling question began to creep into the silence. What now? The mission was over. The enemy was defeated. But what does a soldier do when the war ends? I found myself sitting in front of my laptop late at night, aimlessly searching for something. An answer, a direction. I stumbled upon a video of a talk by Dr. Edith Eger, a psychologist and a survivor of the Holocaust. She was an old woman, small and frail, but her voice was filled with an unbreakable strength. She spoke of her horrific experiences, but she also spoke of the power of choice. And then she said something that pierced through the numbness I had wrapped around myself. We cannot choose to have a life without pain, she said, her kind eyes looking directly into the camera. But we can choose to be free, to escape the past no matter what happens to us. We can choose to be victims, or we can choose to be survivors. And as I listened to this woman who had survived the very worst of humanity, I finally began to cry. Not tears of pain or anger, but tears of profound cathartic release. She was right. I couldn't change what Liam had done. I couldn't undo the years of being the shadow. But I could choose what it meant. I could choose what to do with the aftermath. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. The scar on my temple was a faint silvery line now. A permanent reminder of the war. It was not a mark of shame. It was not a sign of weakness. It was proof that I had been wounded. Yes, but I had not been destroyed. It was proof that I had survived. And yes, the question that had echoed in the silence of my home, how do you turn a scar into a source of strength, was not one I could answer overnight. The answer didn't come from a book or a single moment of revelation. It was built piece by piece over the course of the next year. A year later, the faint silvery line on my temple was just a part of me, no more noticeable than a freckle. It no longer acted with the memory of the impact. Instead, it had become a quiet reminder, a compass point that had set me on a new heading. I had found my answer. You turn a scar into strength by using it as a map to help others navigate their own dangerous territory. My pain had become my purpose. I saw with a soldier's clarity how vulnerable young service members are, especially to financial manipulation from the very people they trust the most. They're taught to have unwavering loyalty, to put the team before themselves. But no one teaches them how to build a fortress around their own lives, their own finances, their own well-being. So with Sarge Miller's guidance and the logistical help of a few guys from my team, I started a small nonprofit. We called it the Operator's Ledger. Our mission was simple: provide free, no-nonsense financial literacy and personal boundary workshops for the soldiers at Fort Bragg. We taught them how to read a contract, how to spot a predatory loan, how to say no to a family member without feeling like a traitor. We gave them the armor we knew they would need, not for the battlefield overseas, but for the one they might face back home. One afternoon, I stood in front of a classroom full of young soldiers, men and women with fresh haircuts and earnest, eager faces. They reminded me of myself years ago, full of ideals and a desperate need to prove myself. I didn't tell them the graphic details of my story. They didn't need to know my war stories. They needed the lessons I had learned from them. The code of honor we live by doesn't just apply downrange, I told them, my voice steady and clear, echoing slightly in the quiet room. It applies in your own living room. Loyalty is paramount. We all know that. But your loyalty must first be to the truth and to your own safety. You have to protect your own flank before you can effectively protect anyone else. Never let anyone, and I mean anyone, turn your love and your sense of duty into a weapon to be used against you. I looked out at their faces and I saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes. I saw the quiet nods. They were listening, and I knew in that moment that my scar had found its voice. The healing, though, wasn't just in the mission. It was in the quiet moments in between. Alex and I had moved. We sold my old house, the fortress that had served its purpose but held too many ghosts. We bought a new place a little further out of town, a simple ranch house with a wide green backyard that backed up to a quiet stretch of woods. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on the back porch watching Alex work. He was building a swing set, the frame made of thick solid oak beams. He was a detective, not a carpenter, and he was meticulously measuring every angle, his brow furrowed in concentration. Our dog, Ranger, was lying in a patch of sun on the grass, his tail thumping softly every time he heard the buzz of the saw. The air smelled of freshly cut wood and pine needles. It was the smell of peace. Just then, Sarge Miller's truck pulled into the driveway. He and his wife, a kind, smiling woman named Mary, came around the back of the house. He was carrying a big pitcher of iced tea, and she was holding a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies. Thought you two might need a break, Sarge grumbled in his usual gruff way, but his eyes were kind. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the porch, sipping sweet tea, eating cookies, and talking about nothing important. A new fishing spot. Sarge had found a funny case Alex was working on. Mary's prized rose bushes. The sound of our laughter mingled with the bird song from the woods. And I looked at the scene. At Alex, his t-shirt smudged with sawdust. At Sarge and Mary, their comfortable, easy affection, a testament to decades of partnership. At Ranger, sleeping soundly. At my feet. And I realized with a wave of profound gratitude that this was my family now. Not a family forged in blood and obligation, but one built on a foundation of shared respect, quiet understanding, and homemade cookies. It was a family I had chosen, and that had chosen me back. That evening, as the setting sun painted the North Carolina sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the swing was finished. I sat on the smooth wooden seat and Alex stood behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders before giving a soft push. I swung forward, rising up into the cooling air. I had lost a brother, the one I had once idolized. But in that painful, brutal journey, I had finally found myself. I had learned that the most important part of the Special Forces motto to free the oppressed was that sometimes the person you have to free is the one staring back at you in the mirror. The swing glided back and forth, a gentle, steady rhythm. I was no longer a shadow defined by someone else's light. I was no longer just a victim defined by what had been done to me. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was the architect of my own quiet, peaceful life. And finally, under the vast, silent sky, I was free. Thank you for listening to my story. My journey taught me that our deepest wounds can often become our greatest strengths, and that sharing our truth is how we reclaim our power. This channel is a place for survivors, for fighters, and for anyone who has ever had to build their own dawn. If you believe in the power of these stories to heal and inspire, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing. You'll be joining a community that understands, and you won't miss the next story of resilience. Thank you.